All right, everyone, you've got an uncontrolled Ebola epidemic in the Congo. The border, by the way, with Rwanda, initially they were going to close it. I think their health minister weighed in, but then they decided just to enhance screening. So they're not even closing their border, which I personally think is a bad thing, but, who fucking knows how things are going to work out there. You've got 2 new cases of Ebola in Goma, which is sort of the red line to be crossed before it's a major health emergency for the world, which they should have declared months ago. You've got a dozen new cases in Beni, which is a city of 250,000. Goma has over 1 million. You got 2 new cases there connected with the initial case. It has begun to spread. No telling how many additional cases there might be. Again, if it gets into that densely populated 200,000-300,000 person ghetto on the west side of Goma, it's going to burn through that area. It's not going to be contained very easily. You're going to have to rope off the whole city, I would think. It's also still in Butembo, a city the size of Boston population-wise. You've got new cases there. It's not contained. And it's unlikely at this point they're going to contain it. It's in too many metropolitan areas with too high a density for them, I think, to snuff it out properly. The problem is we still don't have an effective vaccine. You've got an experimental vaccine that shows some promise. You don't have enough doses to inoculate all of Goma. They deployed a few 100,000 in and around Beni and Butembo and still burning through there. It's not even 100% effective. Aid workers get the vaccine, and yet several of them have gotten infected and died fairly recently. In the last month, I think 2 or 3 died. You've got huge problems there, and the world, by and large, still doesn't even understand that this Ebola epidemic is happening. This is worse than the last one. Number-wise, as far as the number of new cases and deaths, it's still quite a bit lower. But it's getting there, and the rate of infection can easily pick up now that it's in Goma if it takes hold. Oh, it'll skyrocket, it'll go exponential. The problem is, in the West African epidemic, it never hit a major population center. Other than people that were infected, quarantined, brought to a better medical facility in one of the cities there, it was in small town West Africa, Liberia, Guinea, and Sierra Leone. In and around these areas, it was the smaller villages and stuff. It was being, on foot. People were traveling around from place to place, getting sick. Some health workers died, and that was the problem. The problem is now it's in a zone of much higher population density. Goma is very, very large. Butembo is very large. Beni's not too shabby either. It's a city of over 250,000 people. You've got 3 major metropolitan areas, therefore, including one with an international airport that have been infected. The third location with that airport is also on the border of Rwanda. Literally, the barrier, there's a chain link fence between Rwanda and Congo in regards to this city. It's that porous. So it's right next to several other countries, this infected zone. It's in an area that's under the constant threat of civil war, politically, with the government there having instability issues. You've also got an internal conflict between different rebel factions, guerrilla warfare in the area, which means that you get attacks on aid workers, attacks on Ebola clinics. It is a disaster waiting to happen. It is a massive humanitarian crisis, 10,000 times worse than Darfur, waiting to happen, and yet the world barely even acknowledges that it exists. Everyone was so worried in the last big Ebola epidemic, but by the time that you had, 1,000 deaths or more now in the current epidemic, when you got to that point in West Africa, the world took notice and started getting scared and demanding a response. This time around, most people don't even know there's an epidemic there. It's spreading more slowly, admittedly. Part of that, I have a feeling, is just that it was slow to take off and hit any towns, like with any form of travel whatsoever. Like West Africa, the area that it infected before, the overall density, I believe, is higher, even though it didn't hit any major metro areas. Like the towns were more linked up, more roads, more infrastructure for it to travel around. By and large, in the area that it's in now, until it hit Goma recently, it's like dirt roads for the most part. But it's not anymore. It's in a city of over 1 million people. Think about that. Imagine that a city of over 1 million people, let's say that Boston had several Ebola cases. Don't you think people in the whole U.S. would take notice and be upset and afraid and demand a better response? Oh, you should have taken care of this problem before it happened. Of course they would. But somehow, because it's in Africa, nobody cares, despite the fact that flight is a thing. It's possible to get Ebola there, get on a plane, come to the United States, be totally asymptomatic for several days, have flu-like symptoms, be too fucking stubborn to go to a hospital, get checked out. Well, yeah, I was in the Congo. Maybe I've got Ebola. People don't want to believe that. The sad truth about humans is they'd rather put their heads in the sand. They get flu-like symptoms. They infect 5 or 6 other fucking people. You know, what if they go to Manhattan? What if they go to fucking Los Angeles or something? And they infect maybe 50 people. You know, and all of a sudden you get a miniaturized epidemic, and it becomes harder and harder to trace who's been contacted. 3 or 4 generations later, all hell fucking breaks loose. And if it makes it into a country like the United States with the speed of travel and the infrastructure here, it'll spread to multiple locations before you even know that it's happening. No, you won't know that it's happening. It's a disaster waiting to happen. It's the next Black Death leering up into our faces, and nobody's bothering to do anything about it. Oh, we're developing an experimental vaccine. Okay. You might want to develop it faster. Free up more funds, free up more manpower, and fucking quarantine the area. Yes, all of these metro areas should be walled off at the moment. No, there should be no travel to and from these locations while they're infected. If it's some small town of 17 people, it's a little bit different than when it's in a metro area with 1 million. There's a total difference. The density is different. The travel opportunities are different. These people are nuts. And the local government's barely able to do anything to help. By and large, it's a foreign response. What medical infrastructure in Africa? Especially in the Congo. In Central Africa, there's not a whole lot of an apparatus to deal with disease. Nobody ever before, I guess, expected Ebola would be able to do this. By the way, it's always one mutation away from skyrocketing anyway, like the West African outbreak. It's one mutation away from being more communicable. If that happens, and it's in Goma while it happens, it's going to kill 500,000 people. That's at a minimum. It's going to kill half the city's population. Goma will look like a fucking stinking graveyard. You'll be very lucky if it doesn't travel to other countries. At the very least, if it didn't become a regional epidemic and envelop 5 or 6 more nations there before you get a handle on it, at the very least, I'd be very surprised. You'd see 10, 20 million people killed. You know, and no, again, nobody cares. Oh, it's over there. It's over in tropical disease land. World travel exists now. We are overdue for a major pandemic in this world. We are already past due for one. Every 100 years, like clockwork, every century or almost century, we get one of these outbreaks. We haven't had one anytime recently. The closest we've had is like SARS and MERS scared people. We get flu outbreaks. Oh my god, we got Fujian strain of flu. Okay, that's not the same thing. I'm talking about something more communicable and much more lethal. At least on the order of a Spanish flu. 10% death rate or thereabouts. Or polio, back when that used to sweep through populations. Or smallpox. You know, we were good at eradicating diseases. Maybe we should start trying to do more of that. But then we've got anti-vaxxers to deal with, so that becomes a problem. We've got people who think that the cure for their ailment is to chew up a few leaves. Well, yeah, if your problem is psychological or maybe even parasitical, yeah, that can work. Bacterial infection, yeah, there are antimicrobial substances in nature. Rub sulfur on your wound. Use rock salt or something. Chamomile is antimicrobial. Wonderful. Viruses and cancer don't give a fuck about your homeopathy, dude. They just don't fucking give a shit. Yeah, so, you know, enjoy the Ebola, I suppose. Got a real problem. It's leering us in the face, just like the Black Death did. I'm sure there were probably people who say, oh, yeah, a bunch of Asians are dying right now, but it won't get here. We're Byzantines. We've got sewers and things. Don't worry too much about the whole city was depopulated. Ha ha ha, our enemies are dying. I'm sure there are people who thought about it that way before it hit them and didn't have too much fun thereafter. That's about all. Peace out.